River Monsters takes me filming and fishing all over the world, and while we plan these expeditions meticulously, there's always one thing you can't control, and that's the weather. What I do is I investigate stories of people who've been bitten, pulled under the water. What if the man chasing the world's deadliest fish was running from something deeper? Jeremy Wade, the calm voice behind River Monsters, has pulled up creatures no one believed existed. But behind the daring expeditions and near-death encounters lies a story that fans have never fully seen. Was he ever truly safe in those remote waters? And what price did he pay for uncovering nature's dark secrets? This video reveals the sacrifices, the hidden losses, and the emotional toll behind Wade's global journey. Here's what really happened beneath the surface. The curious boy from Suffolk. Before he was reeling in Goliath catfish in remote corners of the planet, Jeremy Wade was just a quiet boy growing up near the peaceful River Stour in Suffolk, England. Born in 1956 in Ipswich, Jeremy's early life was far from wild or adventurous. But even in that calm English countryside, something was stirring inside him. A deep fascination with water and what lived beneath its surface. By the time he was 7, he was already sneaking down to the river with a simple rod and line, drawn more by curiosity than sport. His world was small, but his imagination ran deep. Jeremy's father was a vicar, and his upbringing was quiet, structured, and academic. But he wasn't drawn to theology. Instead, it was the mystery of the unknown, the creatures that lurked out of sight, the ripples in the current, the sudden pull on a line that gripped his attention. The rivers and streams of England became his first classroom. He studied every twitch of the rod, every swirl of water, as if decoding messages from another world. And more than anything, he learned patience. Fishing didn't offer instant gratification. It taught him to observe, to wait, and to respect what he didn't yet understand. As a meld of inquisitiveness and discipline, it shone in Jeremy to concentrate more on science. He has gone to Bristol University and graduated from there in zoology. It was here, however, that he became more focused not with fish, but on learning the importance of ecological balances within fresh waterways. There was no dream about celebrity status. He had no plans to become even a broadcaster. He merely wanted to know why these creatures were so elusive. After Bristol, he earned his postgraduate teaching certificate in biological sciences. While it was important, formal education was never enough. Jeremy felt that the true knowledge, the true mystery, lay far beyond the classroom into barely mapped rivers to fish few had ever seen. He had only begun his travels in 1982, realizing his first real journey far from England. He went to India on a shoestring budget, not for tourism, obviously. Jeremy had heard stories about the giant fish in the rivers of the Himalayas. The Messier golden-scaled river predators that could grow as long as a man was the most interesting thing to Jeremy. A gutsy decision, especially for someone without any funds, friends on site, or any assurance of success. But that was not what Jeremy was after. He sought answers. The great thing is that his parents never discouraged him. Perhaps they did not know why he was too consumed by it, but they respected his determination. And Jeremy was no loose nut when setting out for a journey. He prepared with meticulous detail. No preparation was such that it could prepare him for what was going to happen. That trip to India would begin as something scientific, but it ended as one of the most horrifying episodes of his life. His experience would be overshadowed by what had been laid during the early Suffolk rivers. But what happened in India would test more than just his patience. It tested his freedom. The arrest that nearly broke him. In 1982, with nothing more than a fishing rod, a backpack, and a deep obsession for river monsters, Jeremy Wade landed in India. He was 26 years old, driven by stories of the legendary Himalayan mahseer, a riverfish said to be as powerful as a freight train and as elusive as a ghost. For Jeremy, this wasn't just a fishing trip. It was a pilgrimage. But what he didn't know then was that this journey would nearly cost him everything. And you won't find, other people there. It's just very hard work traveling there. His freedom, his sanity, and possibly his life. At first, things were simple. Jeremy traveled by train and bus across northern India, following rivers that curled like veins through remote regions. He camped by banks, fished with locals, and recorded everything he saw. His goal wasn't just to catch the mahseer. He wanted to document its behavior biology and place in the ecosystem. But to many locals, a lone foreigner asking questions and spending long hours near rivers seemed suspicious, especially in the early 1980s, when political tensions and insurgent movements made remote areas heavily guarded. Then came the moment to change his life. In a remote village near the Indo-Nepal border, Jeremy found himself arrested by local authorities. They accused him of being a spy. To them, his equipment cameras, notebooks, strange devices looked as much like tools for surveillance as they did for science. He did not speak the local dialect, and no one could verify his story. A stranger in an alien land, he suddenly found himself on suspicion of something he could not even imagine. Jeremy was arrested and interrogated for several hours. He tried to explain himself, tried to present his zoological research credentials and fishing logs, but it did not matter. The longer he explained, the more suspicious he seemed. He was held in a tiny cell with no guarantee of release. No embassy was contacted, and no lawyer was provided for him. Days blurred into nights, and the first stages of fear began to creep in. There have been very few public details on just how long he was held, but Jeremy later described it as one darkest periods he could think of. Not because he was beaten or tortured, but because of the helplessness, the uncertainty. He did not know if he would get out, and if he did, how. His mind was racing toward worst-case scenarios. Would his family back home even know of his whereabouts? Would anyone look for him? A stroke of interceded by the kindness of a local official eventually saved Jeremy's life. He had an officer who said he knew fishing recognized the name mahseer and believed his story. Jeremy was released, shaken, but in one piece. He was a different person now. It was more than an arrest. It was a brush with the reality of being an outsider, and how quickly the world turns curiosity into a threat, and how much more vulnerable a person is outside his own known world. He didn't fish at all for days when he returned to the river. He just sat there in a spot in the same direction all day into the night, looking at the water and trying to pull his shattered self back together. The mahseer now slipped entirely from his thoughts, but that seemed quite unimportant. The only thing that counted right now was that he had survived. He later termed that arrest brutal awakening, a reminder that one need not be a good shot at the mark to keep the rattling dangers of life at bay. He made it out, but the trauma would follow him into even darker waters. Danger in the depths of the Amazon. Few places on Earth are as brutal and mysterious as the Amazon River. Spanning over 4,000 miles through thick jungle, it's not just home to rare wildlife. It's a living, breathing ecosystem of predators, disease, and natural chaos. For Jeremy Wade, the Amazon wasn't just a destination. It was an obsession, but his journey into its tangled heart nearly cost him his life more than once. Jeremy's first major expedition into the Amazon basin came in the early 1990s. Still a relatively unknown biologist and angler at the time, he set out to explore the myth of man-eating fish, the kind whispered about by locals. Creatures like the Arapaima red-bellied piranha, or even river stingrays with venom strong enough to cripple a man. He was determined to separate fact from folklore, but nothing could prepare him for what lay ahead. Their quest started from Brazil and quickly found them in Peru, where Jeremy was joining a team of local fishermen journeying into the interior jungle to target remote tributaries. They traveled by boat and machete, cut through dense forest via land to reach their destination where they lived off the land. No hotels, found no cell towers for hundreds of miles, no hospitals at least for hundreds of miles. Every morning, the beauty of the landscape would be marred with realities from snake bites, jaguar presence, tropical storm activity, and unidentified waterborne parasites. Water for simple drinking was also an exhausting worry, but it was a pretty different danger one could never have guessed by Jeremy's own body. After weeks of exposure to hot humidity, dirty water, and insufficient food, Jeremy fell ill from a nasty parasitic infection. The early symptoms, exhaustion and headache, quickly developed and led to vomiting, dizziness, and high fever. He later described it as being caged within one's body. He could neither walk without stumbling nor keep food inside him. He had to depend on locals who would literally guard him 24/7. There was no guarantee that he would heal. If the fever didn't break, he could very likely die out there, but he won't budge for evacuation. Jeremy had the guts to put his life in danger because he believed that if he exited the mission, he would never again get a chance to document something extraordinary. The size of this. I've been thinking I've been catching big ones. At night in the hammock with a wet shirt and shaking limbs, he would heed the calls of howler monkeys and wonder if that were how it could end. Alone, nameless amidst wilderness that cared nothing. Somehow or other, though, the fever showed signs of breaking thanks to a compound of local and sheer will. And that was the moment when he accomplished perhaps the most remarkable feat of fishing of the whole trip. An enormous arapaima, one of the biggest freshwater fish in the world. 7 feet long and weighing more than 200 pounds, the fish had avoided capture by scientists for years. Its biology, behavior, and feeding habits were all still mysteries. Well, Jeremy had not just caught it, he filmed it, studied it, and collected enough data to publish scientific findings on it later. He returned from the expedition emaciated and scarred, and a few pounds lighter, but profoundly changed. Amazon had tried to slay him, and nearly did, but in so doing it rewarded him with something else, an epiphany. It was not just about dangerous fish. It was about understanding our place in nature, how fragile we really are, and how sometimes the most monstrous things aren't the creatures in the water, but our refusal, our limitations, and our inability to admit that some places can swallow us whole. But all the danger in the wild couldn't prepare him for the personal loss he never expected, a private tragedy. Jeremy Wade has spent much of his life surrounded by danger, piranhas, stingrays, venomous catfish, and swirling river currents that could drag down even the strongest swimmer. Jeremy Wade has traveled the globe to fish for everything from deadly stingrays to man-eating piranhas. But not all dangers are external. Some live quietly in the background, hidden from cameras, unspoken in interviews. And for Jeremy, one of the most haunting chapters of his life was a private tragedy he never intended for the world to see. Jeremy Wade has always been known for his quiet, stoic nature. He's the kind of man who doesn't flinch at a shark circling his kayak or a crocodile lurking nearby. But fans noticed something changed in him around the time River Monsters entered its later seasons. The brightness in his eyes seemed a little dimmer. His narration became more reflective. The episodes felt heavier, not just in tone, but in emotion. Something was different. And it wasn't just about age or fatigue. Never openly, Jeremy stated all the details. Whereas insiders from the production side and longtime friends have alluded to a loss that affected him no matter the period during the height of the show's success. As per the 2016 interview, Jeremy stated he stepped away from filming for personal reasons and exhaustion. As for the show's shootings, everyone had something different in mind. One other very close friend later revealed the fact that quite recently, Jeremy had to face a loss of someone very dear, possibly either a longtime partner or an immediate family member. Everything in this is purposely vague for the time being. Jeremy has never made any announcement and has definitely never brought the subject into the show as a platform to share his grief. He has encapsulated this debilitating pain within himself and continued to tell very powerful stories on screen. The signs were there, however, if you cared to look closer. As time wore on, Jeremy's narration began to revolve more and more towards mortality solitude and the crushing weight of coming face to face with what lies ahead. He presented himself no longer as the unshakable adventurer, but reality caught up with him, and he transformed as a person coming to terms with the costs of life, spent in pursuit of adventure. One particular episode shot along the banks of one of the more isolated rivers in Southeast Asia had him suddenly silent after a few moments into a monologue waiting for longer than several seconds. He then walked alone into the other end of the jungle for almost an hour in his post-cam period. No one even bothered asking him where he went. In later days, he would jot down something about that trip in a shorter travel piece. "The river doesn't care about your sorrow," he wrote. "It just keeps flowing swollen with silence." 9 words spoke more than anything a press release could ever say. The truth is that a life like Jeremy Wade's demands sacrifices that few choose to talk about. Travel after interminable travel away from family for years on end, missed holidays, missed goodbyes. Rumors claimed that Jeremy had been in a serious relationship once, but it fizzled out because his unpredictable lifestyle was too much to bear. Some say the loss was more permanent, that someone died when he was filming on the other side of the world. Whatever the truth is, Jeremy never confirmed it. He never needed to. The loss was stamped into the silence, and in those few moments when he spoke of loss in relation to nature, when his voice faltered, and in the odd episodes where he allowed himself to go beyond mere curiosity into something resembling vulnerability, it was likely that tragedy stepped up Jeremy's relatability. He was no longer just one of the brave river cops. The man had undergone a private tragedy. He'd certainly peered into monsters that live underwater, but he'd also faced a different kind of agony that is hardly captured by any lens. And he still lives with it. He returned to rivers, to nature's zeal, to that incessant search into the unknown. He did not use pain as a reason to not seek everything that transcended mystery, meaning healing and deep introspection. The rivers were no longer just a background, but instead they were mirrors for him. His mind was grieving, but his body was also breaking down. The physical toll of river monsters. For viewers watching from the comfort of their living rooms, River Monsters was an edge-of-your-seat adventure. But for Jeremy Wade, every journey came with bruises, infections, and scars, some visible, many not. While his calm narration and quiet courage made it all seem effortless, the physical toll of filming River Monsters was relentless, grinding, and sometimes nearly fatal. Jeremy Wade wasn't a 20-something stuntman. When the show first aired in 2009, he was already in his early 50s. Most men at that age are slowing down, easing into desk jobs or retirement. Jeremy, by contrast, was wrestling 100-pound river fish, hiking into remote swamps, and hauling camera gear across jungles in temperatures that often soared above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. He didn't just tell survival stories, he lived them. And his body paid the price. River Monsters is composed of almost all episodes in which Jeremy went where no man has dared to. River Monsters, which begins its 7th season on Jeremy Wade, chasing fish that were supposedly slaying legends, maiming folk and slaying people. Many times he has to walk for days in inhospitable land, maze-like rainforests, freezing rivers, and blistering deserts. The environment is not just harsh, it was downright punishing. And unlike a movie star working off-set, he had no stunt, double no catering van. Everything we saw on screen was real. The hook casts the falls, the splashes. He filmed another episode in Papua New Guinea, where Jeremy developed a high fever after battling unfathomable insect bites. In addition, he had been diagnosed with dengue fever, a mosquito-borne infection characterized by searing joint pain, extreme fatigue, and colossal fevers. He should have flown back home, but instead he waited to complete the film. There was a time when he could barely even stand, but continued to battle it with gritted teeth and little sleep. Then followed the infections, incessant, unpredictable, and very often slow to heal. Immersing the hands and arms into unknown river water day by day was leading to frequent cuts, scrapes, and frequent bacterial exposure. In places like the Congo or Amazon, even a little wound would turn life-threatening. And I'm in the remote Colombian Amazon closing in on a river monster suspected of killing a young. Once Jeremy suffered from a festering foot infection and was unable to walk without feeling pain. He pulled a thorn from his leg, later realizing it had lodged itself next to a blood vessel, which left untreated could have caused sepsis. Jeremy was also not spared by injuries during the catch itself. Dragged under the water on numerous occasions by fish heavier than him, one stingray in Argentina left him breathless and nearly pinned him to the riverbed. On another score, a goonch catfish, also famously known as a catfish, so thrashing about that he was left with bruised ribs and strained muscles. But for him, the worst injury came with fatigue. There was little time for rest, as filming often took place in extreme conditions for sometimes weeks at a time. Sleeping was scarce. Hardly having enough time to reach out for a drink while finding a few proper meals became even harder. The ground crew took risks alike. However, Jeremy had to perform along with them. He wasn't just cruising over rivers. He was hosting a television show with dialogues and orchestrating the event into looking smooth while fighting things like dizziness, heat stroke, or muscle cramps. Each of those trips took something out of him physically and mentally. This becomes even tougher, as sometimes he had to travel to different places by air. One year saw Jeremy visit more than a dozen nations while crossing from one time zone to another, climate or altitude every few days. His immunity to diseases continued to weaken due to this rigorous traveling. Chronic back pains were diagnosed, which may have resulted from years of pulling gear and hefting fish that were almost as big as him. On some days, he admits he has given everything to just get out of bed and tie his boots. On camera, though, he rarely complains. Behind this curtain, however, it has meant building the shadow of an unspoken rhythm, whereby the crew and Jeremy would have to stretch their limits. They would modify gear setups, reschedule shooting, or worse, they would postpone the filming because Mr. Jeremy was visibly suffering the consequences of a hard shoot. But Jeremy would never allow the show to reflect weakness. His philosophy was simple. If you commit to telling a story, see it through even if it costs you something. He once told an interviewer, if you don't come back from a trip with at least one scar, you probably didn't go far enough. This was not just bravado. It was experience. And those scars, both physical and emotional, shaped the man behind River Monsters. For all the monsters he caught, the greatest battle Jeremy Wade faced was always against his own limits. He got quite a bit wrecked in time. There was a recovery period that dragged along. In the later seasons, sharp-eyed fans have seen that he was more cautious in his movements. But still strong miles showed. Jeremy had to eventually face up to the truth that even the toughest adventurer has a shelf life. The question became, how long could he keep going? That made it very clear in one moment. He, while just climbing, had gotten altitude sickness. Jeremy blacked out for a few moments in Mongolia after a long hike. He later said he might have collapsed altogether had the camera not been switched on. The incident scared the crew. It scared him too. More caution began to be taken, not out of fear of the rivers, though, but after he accepted the toll on his body. And through it all, his perspective started to shift towards something deeper than monsters, when River Monsters became a mission. At first, River Monsters was just meant to be a show, an adventure series about dangerous fish and forgotten legends. But as the seasons rolled on, something began to shift. For Jeremy Wade, it wasn't just about catching fish anymore. It became about uncovering truths that local communities were desperate to explain, correcting historical myths, and even warning people about real dangers lurking in the world's waters. Jeremy once said you start with a story about a monster, but what you often find is a much bigger story about the people who live with that fear. That shift from spectacle to service changed the soul of the show. River monsters transformed into something deeper, a mission to protect lives, tell hidden stories, and uncover what really lies beneath the surface. In early episodes, the focus was often on folklore creatures blamed for missing persons or bizarre injuries. But as the research deepened, Jeremy realized many of the so-called monsters weren't evil or supernatural. They were real animals misunderstood by generations of people. In some cases, they were endangered species pushed to attack by environmental pressure. In others, they weren't dangerous at all, just scapegoats for unrelated tragedies. Death Ray, for example, took Jeremy to Argentina to investigate attacks by giant freshwater stingrays. Villagers living along the Paraná River expressed concerns that their wounds and deaths in the water were causing their fate to be sealed as a result of a cascading spell of misfortune, which caused rumors of a deadly beast to spread throughout the area. Jeremy didn't just catch a big stingray, but he traced the apparently exaggerated form of attacks back to increased environmental pollution and illegal dumping. The fish didn't hunt humans. They reacted to a disturbed system. Such an event was a watershed moment. It was much more than a capture, for it became a trailhead. Environmental degradation, overfishing, and climate shifts became recurring themes behind every monster tale, with minor actors giving them a different twist. Jeremy collaborated more closely with local scientists and conservationists. He began thinking about river safety, not just telling stories, and he realized for the first time how much this platform's power was available for education rather than entertainment. Like his predecessors and many modern scientists, this 54-year-old man was bent on Goliath tigerfish investigations far in the Congo, one of the fish most feared by men, some of whom regarded it as being cursed. There was some irony then that in trying to follow Goliath tigerfish investigations, Jeremy was confronted by villages whose occupants feared the river. Most people were not able to swim, and drowning accidents among children would happen on occasions where they simply fell into the turbulent current. He then devoted some time to teaching rudimentary water safety and currents, and when feasible, distributing life jackets footage that rarely made it to the shows. On the other side of the camera, River Monsters went on some humanitarian missions. Real-life drama for a TV crew, the team from Animal Planet's River Monsters. With the supplies residing in River Monsters, medical aid, water purification equipment, and basic fishing gear are intended for the challenged villages. In the remote portions of Asia, South America, and Africa, Jeremy's name was not simply a household name linked to TV fame. It represented aid and hope. But when the cameras stopped rolling, what kind of life was left behind? Life after the monsters. When River Monsters aired its final episode in 2017, it marked the end of an era. After 9 intense seasons, 50 episodes, and over a decade of travel across more than 30 countries, Jeremy Wade was stepping away from the show that made him a global icon. But while the cameras may have stopped rolling on monster hunts, Jeremy's life was far from quiet. The years that followed were not a retirement. They were a new chapter of purpose, reflection, and reinvention. Wade never saw River Monsters as a celebrity vehicle. The fame that came with it was unexpected and often uncomfortable. He once confessed that being recognized in airports or asked for selfies while shopping felt surreal. To him, it was always about the mission, not the spotlight. So when the show ended, he did not pursue spin-offs for attention. He wanted meaning, and he found it by stepping away from monsters but not from the water. Almost immediately after River Monsters, Wade returned with a new series, Jeremy Wade's Mighty Rivers. This time the focus wasn't on dangerous creatures. Jeremy Wade and his crew from Animal Planet's River Monsters seek out the largest, most deadly creatures in the world. But on endangered ecosystems, he revisited some of the world's great rivers, like the Mississippi, Amazon, Ganges, and Yangtze, not to hunt, but to understand. Why were these once powerful arteries of civilization now struggling to survive? What was threatening them? Who was fighting to save them? The pace of mighty rivers was a different one, almost slower, more contemplative. Wade was not just a presenter. He was at the heart of witnessing change. He would go on to interview scientists, fishermen, and local advocates to take into account the effects of neglect, such as pollution, overfishing, and other climate-related issues. The series brought to the fore that sometimes the scariest monsters are not things but the consequences of human abuse. And audiences responded. Mighty Rivers never created the same adrenaline-driven excitement as River Monsters, for it instead struck chords of responsibility and curiosity. Wade, entering his 60s, would transition effortlessly into a new role, part teacher, part conservationist, indeed, ever the explorer. In 2020, Wade was at it again with a follow-up show titled Dark Waters, centering on mysterious disappearances and unnatural sightings from an investigative perspective. He ventured from the disappearance of an entire U.S. submarine crew to lake monsters and toxic water events. The series incorporated science, folklore, and crime solving. It proved that Wade's desire for all that is mysterious and truthful had evolved into something different. In the background, Wade returned to his academic roots. He formally obtained his degree in zoology from Bristol University. University of Bristol discriminated against her disability and was once a biology teacher making a name for himself through talks, essays, and public education. His books were to sell best: How to Think Like a Fish and River Monsters. True stories of the ones that didn't get away. He didn't merely tell stories, he expounded his philosophies, reflections on nature, and life lessons learned from rivers, failures, and solitude. Jeremy Wade's story is one of obsession survival and a silent endurance few could bear. If this story moved you, drop a comment below. What's one thing you've learned from Jeremy's journey? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and watch the next video on screen for more untold stories behind legendary lives.